Hello, my name is Grace Nelson. I'm a Fall 23 Capstone candidate, and this is my presentation. It's Let's Talk About You Know What, a narrative review exploring comprehensive sex education literature in the United States from 2017 to 2023. So some background for my project is I wanted to look at comprehensive sex education because programs that use comprehensive sex ed provide crucial benefits to public health. And despite the known benefits and support that exists for comprehensive sex ed, the US is currently experiencing a decline in the schools that are delivering sex education. And without a proper understanding of sexual and reproductive health, individuals, as they develop and grow up, may be at risk for engaging in risky behaviors or adverse outcomes. So personally, I was influenced to do this topic because my sex education growing up lacked sexual reproductive health topics that would have helped me personally, such as education on reproductive health disorders like endometriosis, which I have. And there was just a lack of inclusive topics and didn't provide me with a proper understanding of HIV/AIDS. So the aim of this project was to analyze what literature is currently available about just sex education in the United States. And I wanted to gain a better understanding of what that climate of sex education is, and then evaluate how the current literature can be applied to help guide the United States towards a more comprehensive sex education effort. So the methods that I used for this project was I did a search with PubMed. So the inclusion and exclusion criteria I used for my search are displayed on the slide. So I wanted to make sure that the study was published in English, was from an academic or scholarly source, or was published in a peer-reviewed empirical, theoretical, or academic journal. The reason I wanted to include an academic or scholarly source was so that I could include papers and other resources from people who are like us at Public Health Day, who did projects and want to share their knowledge and what they learned. So I wanted to make sure I included those in my search as well. I also wanted to make sure the full text was available for the sources that I used, and they had to be based in the United States and published within the past 5 years. So articles that were excluded was if they were a sexual and reproductive health topic that was not related to education. So this would include evaluating perspectives towards sex education. So perspectives such as policymakers and stuff, not evaluating how they feel towards sex education, not the actual outcomes and an evaluation of sex education itself. Those that evaluated sexual behaviors, public policy specifically, and specific cost analysis programs, barriers to sexual reproductive health care, and access to or utilization of healthcare services. So I wanted to narrow down to just those that focused on sex education. Topics of the literature that were analyzed as being a perception or perspective towards sexual reproductive health topics were also included, and this was those concerning policy and education. So I wanted to make sure I looked more at scholarly sources and not more political and legislative outlooks. So here I have key terms from the advanced PubMed search that I did. So I kind of broke them down into my key concepts. So I was looking at sex education, types of sex education, and where. So this kind of shows you what phrases I used in my search, and then the mesh terms that were used to help capture any other phrases or terms that might be missed based on its advanced search features. And then in the next table down here, it goes on this page and as well as the next, you can see it's broken out each search number to show you each filter and detail of each search that I created so it can be replicated. So the results that I got is I had 40 articles overall, and after evaluating for exclusion and inclusion criteria, I was left with 19 sources. So, of these 19 sources, I was able to evaluate into three different kind of groups. So, I wanted to look at the current climate of sex ed in the US. So, those topics included current sex education focuses and positive outcomes with conclusive sex ed, benefits of sex education in school, and positive impacts of visibility in sex ed. So, that first topic it really touched on what is currently being a what is currently applying in the United States right now. So current sex ed programs are shown to decrease homophobia, motivated bullying, and raise awareness of gender norms. Impact of visibility allows sexual minority youth to feel more included and is linked with better mental health outcomes for them. There's also a need for visibility that all women are sexual and need sexual education because it's important for preventing misconception, as well as boosting self-confidence and helping women optimize their sexual experiences. So one source talked about specifically the perspective of women with spina bifida and the lacks in they experienced in their education and how they didn't have that visibility to be seen or feel like their provider was engaging in conversations and giving them knowledge that they thought was beneficial to them. I also looked at current sex education programs in the US. So, one of the big ones that was looked at was abstinence only education because that was a big motivator after the HIV/AIDS pandemic. So, a lot of what abstinence only education had to do was to promote it kind of promoted fear and stigma towards HIV/AIDS, and it did promote abstinence, but abstinence has not been found to effectively decrease birth rates in the United States, despite funding efforts still towards it. But there are some other current sex education programs, such as MediaWare and MediaWare Parent, which are web based programs. And so MediaWare targets it with adolescents, and MediaWare Parent is able to apply the program to a parent perspective and allow parents to kind of engage with the content themselves. And it also helps open the door for parent teen discussions about sexual reproductive health topics, which is shown to have positive outcomes in individuals who are able to have those discussions with their parents. There was also Girl to Girl, which was targeting LGBTQ plus population. And then the RCL was I'm blanking on the full name, but it was the Circle of Life, and it was among Native American teens, and it was a program implemented with them to help reduce pregnancy, but also educate on sexual reproductive health topics. And then Reply was a family planning tool that was utilized to help minimize negative outcomes associated with unintended pregnancy by implementing a family planning tool that helps individuals who use it engage in planning and understanding of their reproductive health goals. So barriers that were found to sex education in the US was the view of sex as a problem. So sex education programs in the United States often will perpetuate the idea that sex is a problem behavior and will imply that engaging in sexual activity has moral or ethical consequences. So this approach kind of casts a shadow of fear over sexual activity rather than promoting it as a healthy, normal, safe, or pleasurable activity. But in order to achieve positive outcomes, there needs to be a safe climate in order to accommodate discussion of sensitive topics and in order to engage those who are receiving sex education with the topic to understand and absorb the information. There was also an impact of heteronormative approaches. So gender-based harassment, such as homophobic bullying, arises when narrow viewpoints on gender and perpetuation of gender stereotypes prevail. So to eliminate these perspectives, we need to encompass more inclusive literature and education efforts, because an association with Inclusive sex education has been found to lower odds of school bullying, and it also, if inclusive sex education topics are not found outside or inside school-based programs, sexual and minority individuals will seek alternative options for sex education. And those topics usually include information that is from their perspective and includes topics that are inclusive to them and their sexual orientation or their gender. So stigma surrounding sexual reproductive health topics are perpetuated through fear, shame, and prejudice. There's also misconceptions and vulnerabilities that happen in sex education within the United States. So as mentioned before, women with spina bifida receive inadequate sources of sexual health representation because they don't have visibility, and this leaves them vulnerable to sexual assault as well. There's also the impact of policy and politics on sex education in the United States. So the education that an individual receives may vary by state, and there's also a difference in the effects of sex education based on the politics of the state. So abstinence-only sex education programs do provide benefits in conservative states, but it's only on a county level at a 3% reduction of teen birth rates. But there is no effect of abstinence-only education on the United States as a whole. And inclusive sex education has been found to increase positive sex health outcomes. So there's also, with the stigma, fear, misconceptions, and vulnerability, a big impact of this and the policy is the HIV/AIDS pandemic. So the pandemic was a major influence on sex education, and especially policies and politics regarding sex education, because most education programs after the pandemic used fear-based messages, which helped form some of the sex education that we implement today. And it is, some of it directly linked with links HIV/AIDS with same-sex behavior, which again perpetuates negative stereotypes. And also, in addition to this, there was an amendment in 1987 passed called the Helms Amendment, which perpetuated this fear and stigma with HIV/AIDS by requiring that federally funded programs about HIV/AIDS had to place an emphasis on abstinence, and that it forbid the inclusion of homosexuality and drug use in this education, which is an important aspect that needs to be included in order to understand why protecting against HIV/AIDS is important and understanding the scope of the pandemic. There's also barriers in federal funding, as most programs that are federally funded do use evidence-based information that reduce adolescent pregnancies, but they are subject to certain standards and regulations, such as that of the Helms Amendment. Also, they tend to support, federal funds tend to be used for abstinence-only education programs, which tend to perpetuate misinformation. So this is just an overview of each article, each of the 19 articles I included. So I had their title, what type of reference they were, and the topic of each. So that was just useful in my evaluation. So current sex education in the US focuses on risk reduction and neglects topics like healthy relationships and sexual pleasure. Inclusive sex education approaches have positive outcomes, and reducing risky behaviors and improving mental health outcomes is beneficial for sexual minorities. Comprehensive sex education programs in schools have benefits in decreasing bullying and raising awareness of gender norms and preventing sexual assault. Abstinence-only programs are ineffective at reducing birth rates and can increase sexual health risks. So the lack of inclusive topics that current sex education programs utilize contribute to sexual health inequities and vulnerabilities of sexual minority individuals in particular. Some of the factors that influence this impact of sex education include those views of sex as a problem behavior, the heteronormative approaches, the stigma, fear, misconception, and the vulnerabilities that they perpetuate. There's also the culture and politics and state policies that play a significant role, and the fear-based messages that they emphasize is not productive towards positive sexual reproductive health outcomes. And federal funding for sex education programs have both positive and negative implications, but some programs effectively reduce birth rates while others promote misinformation. So there's just a need for more comprehensive knowledge that has inclusion towards more populations that promote positive sex health outcomes and reduce inequities, because these inclusive topics work to promote better health outcomes for the individuals in the United States. So I lost my train of thought. So by implementing inclusive topics, the United States can help to compete with other developed nations, as we currently have the highest teen birth rate and all our pregnancies are more likely to be unplanned. So the impact of sex education, it varies across the United States, and there's a need to make it more mainstream. And so in order to do that, it's important to look at the current literature that is available that can guide us to make important decisions and effective decisions, so we do not repeat the mistakes such as after the HIV/AIDS pandemic, and make sure we have inclusive education that does not stigmatize or stereotype individuals, but promotes self-efficacy and knowledge of their sexual and reproductive health. And then here I just have my references.